What would you do if you discovered that every time your life got stuck, it wasn't because you lacked strength, but because you were obeying the wrong voice? This video will show you exactly how to recognize, viscerally and instantly, when the ego is manipulating your path and when the soul is finally trying to lead you toward your true destiny. If you stay until the end, you will have in your hands the Sufi method that cuts the invisible threads of the ego and opens the inner channel where the soul speaks without distortion. Here, you will understand what no one has ever told you. The soul has always guided you. You simply never learned how to listen. Prepare yourself for the revelation that changes everything. You think you're in control of your life, but the truth is that what pulls you through invisible chains is the ego, hidden behind your decisions, fears, and automatic reactions. The greatest lie the ego tells you is that it is you. And the greatest truth Rumi revealed is that the soul is always trying to guide you, but you don't know how to listen because the ego speaks loudly, shouts, pressures, threatens. The ego controls you through the fear of losing. The soul guides you through the courage to be. And here is where the rupture begins. When you learn to listen to the soul, the ego loses its throne. And when the ego loses its throne, for the first time you act in a way that is real, pure, without interference. This is what Rumi called coming home. The soul doesn't ask you to fight. It asks you to let go. But the ego turns everything into war, even your spiritual search. Yet there is a simple, direct, and brutally effective method of liberation. You must learn to recognize the voice that pushes and the voice that calls. The voice that pushes is the ego. The voice that calls is the soul. Everything begins the moment you recognize the difference. Write in the comments, "My soul guides me," and become a channel member to receive Rumi's advanced teachings. The ego wants to control you because it feeds on your fear. It takes every small situation and turns it into a threat. It makes you believe that if you don't act quickly, you will lose. If you don't respond immediately, you'll be rejected. If you don't decide right now, something bad will happen. But notice this. The ego is always in a hurry. The soul never rushes. The soul observes. The soul feels. The soul directs you without pressure. The difference becomes so clear once you learn to see it that it seems impossible you never noticed it before. Rumi said the ego is like a storm that drags you away, while the soul is the gentle wind that guides you. The storm pulls you through trauma. The wind guides you through truth. And here is the most brutal fact. The soul never speaks through fear. If there is fear, it is the ego speaking, even when it disguises itself as intuition. Intuition does not tighten your chest. Intuition expands you. When something inside you contracts, it's ego. When something inside you opens, it's soul. That is the key that changes everything. The ego controls your mind by creating scenarios that will never happen. It traps you in an imaginary future or a repeated past. It paralyzes you with thoughts that aren't even yours. It's as if it places a blindfold over your eyes and convinces you it's protecting you, when in truth it's keeping you small. Rumi taught that the soul is like a light hidden behind many curtains, and every automatic behavior is another curtain. Yet when you stop and observe, one thing happens. The curtains begin to fall. The soul doesn't need to fight to appear. It only needs you to silence the internal noise the ego creates. When you listen with presence, the ego shrinks. When you listen with fear, the ego dominates. And here is the paradigm shift. You don't need to kill the ego. You need to disobey it. Disobeying the ego is the greatest spiritual act of a human being. The soul always guides you toward what is true for you. The ego always guides you toward what is comfortable for it. The ego wants repetition. The soul wants expansion. The ego wants security. The soul wants truth. When you follow the soul, your life begins to align in ways the ego could never plan, because the soul sees the entire path, while the ego sees only the next step. Rumi said the soul is the map, and the ego is merely the fear of walking it. That is why the ego tries to convince you that everything is dangerous. It makes you doubt yourself. It makes you doubt what you feel. It makes you doubt what you already know. And it is in this doubt that most people lose control of their own lives, because they learn to trust fear more than their own essence. The soul speaks from within, but you look outward. The soul calls you to move forward, but you ask the world for permission. The soul offers a yes, while the ego creates 10 no's. Rumi's method is simple and devastating. Every time a decision appears, ask your body what it does to you. Not what your mind thinks, what your body feels. The soul speaks through the body. The ego speaks through the mind. If something contracts, suffocates, tightens, hurts, it's ego. If something expands, calms, opens, breathes, it's soul. It's as if the soul places a warm flame in your chest while the ego places ice, and this perception changes your entire life, your choices, your relationships, your future. You stop acting out of fear and start acting out of truth. Rumi said the soul is the only guide worthy of trust, because it desires nothing but your unfolding. The ego wants control. The soul wants freedom. And freedom isn't doing whatever you want. Freedom is doing what the soul knows is right, even when the ego trembles. When you begin letting the soul guide you, the ego panics. It creates doubts, stories, justifications. It tries to pull you back to your old self because that's where it ruled. That is why Rumi said the spiritual path is a dance. The soul advances, the ego retreats. The soul calls, the ego resists. The soul reveals, the ego hides. But the more you follow expansion, the less power the ego holds. It still exists, but it no longer dominates. It becomes a tool, not a tyrant. And the deepest transformation happens when you realize the ego is not your enemy. It's simply terrified. The ego fears disappearing. The soul knows it never disappears. The ego lives for survival. The soul lives for eternity. So when you follow the soul, you lose nothing. You simply return to yourself. Now look at your life. How many decisions have you made out of fear? How many times did you ignore the inner calling because the ego convinced you it was too risky? How many opportunities did you never live because the ego trapped you in, what if it goes wrong? And how many pains did you carry simply because you ignored the soul when it whispered, don't go that way? Rumi said all human suffering comes from the same place, following the ego when the soul is speaking. Suffering is not punishment. It is correction. Life pulling you back to yourself. Every time you ignore the soul, something breaks. Every time you follow the soul, something integrates. Your whole life changes the moment you place the soul in command. The path opens. The right people arrive. Decisions become clear. The mind becomes quiet. It's like walking out of a dark room and finally seeing the light. And now the question Rumi would place before you. At this exact moment, who is guiding you? The ego that tightens or the soul that calls? The soul always speaks first. The ego speaks second, to cancel. Can you feel that? Can you tell which voice pushes and which one lifts you? Can you sense which one is present as you read these words? If you feel a gentle expansion in your chest, it's your soul recognizing truth. If you feel resistance, fear, or tension, it's the ego trying to hold control. From that awareness, everything changes. The inner world shifts. The outer world follows. And remember, there is something greater approaching. Something your soul is preparing. A new portal that opens only when you ask the simplest question, what does my soul want to show me right now? When you truly begin allowing the soul to guide you, something even deeper happens. The ego starts creating false versions of inner voice to confuse you. This is one of the secret wars almost no one ever notices. The ego imitates the soul. It copies the tone, copies the feeling, even copies the calm. But there is one detail it can never fake. The soul never sends you away from yourself. The ego does. The ego pretends to be wisdom, but it pushes you into decisions that pull you away from your essence. Rumi said that when the ego can no longer dominate you through fear, it tries to dominate you through imitation. That is why a true master doesn't teach you how to hear the soul. He teaches you how to recognize the imposter. The soul always leads you inward. The ego always leads you outward. The soul deepens you. The ego scatters you. The soul warms you. The ego agitates you. And when you perceive this difference, its control crumbles like dust in your hands. The most advanced key in Rumi's method is this. The soul speaks through silence. Not the absence of sound, but the absence of tension. If there is any effort to hear its ego, the soul does not compete for space. It does not need a stage. It simply vibrates within you as something that already knows. It is not thought, it is recognition. It feels like remembering, not discovering. The ego gives you answers you must justify. The soul gives you answers you simply need to accept. The ego argues. The soul confirms. Notice this in your life now. Everything you try to convince yourself of is ego. Everything that crosses you with simplicity is soul. This is the shift that transforms your ability to be guided on a deep level. But there is an even more hidden movement. The ego always tries to take over when you are tired, stressed, or accelerated. It knows that in those moments your sensitivity drops and your inner perception weakens, so it speaks louder. That is why, at the most important times of your life, you made chaotic decisions. It wasn't a lack of wisdom, it was a lack of internal silence. Rumi said the soul does not speak in clouded minds. This is why Sufism teaches that clarity is not a spiritual luxury. It is a discipline. The soul does not compete with chaos. It waits for you to clear the inner space. And when that space exists, direction appears with a clarity so sharp it can be frightening. There is also the most precise test of all. The soul never needs you to win. It only needs you to be true. The ego wants victory. The soul wants alignment. The soul does not push you to prove anything. The ego drags you to prove everything. When you follow the soul, you abandon battles that were never yours. When you follow the ego, you enter wars that consume you. And the difference shows up in the body like a shock. Following the soul makes you lighter. Following the ego suffocates you. And it is exactly this physical sensation that reveals who is guiding you at the moment of choice. The body is the soul's channel, because the ego only knows how to speak to the mind. The soul manifests through physical expansion. The more you feel the body, the less the ego can dominate you. Now observe a truth few people have the courage to face. The soul will never lead you into places where you must shrink yourself to fit. The ego will. The ego makes you accept situations that violate your truth just to maintain an image, a role, a rigid logic it created. The soul always cuts away what no longer serves your growth. The ego holds on to what destroys you, to maintain a false sense of control. When you allow the soul to guide your relationships, choices, and movements, everything that is not authentic collapses. And that collapse is frightening, but it is precisely that collapse that frees you. Rumi said that pain exists only to break what prevents the soul from blossoming. Pain is the soul striking against the ego's dominion. The most advanced point of this teaching is understanding that the soul does not want to make you special. It wants to make you real. The ego wants attention. The soul wants truth. The ego wants a stage. The soul wants direction. The soul is simple. The ego is theatrical. The soul frees. The ego binds. And the greatest liberation happens when you realize that following the soul does not require effort. It requires courage. Courage to listen to what you already know. Courage to say yes to what expands you. Courage to say no to what contracts you. Courage to drop the masks the ego glued onto you. When you do this, the path opens like a door that was always unlocked. You just never had the courage to push it. And now, a portal appears, one that only opens for those truly ready. When the soul begins guiding your life, it leads you into situations the ego would never allow. Situations where you must trust before you understand. Move before you feel safe. Release before you see the outcome. And this is where most people freeze, because the ego demands control. The soul demands surrender. The ego wants certainty. The soul wants movement. This is why the test is simple and brutal. If you only act when you feel safe, the ego is guiding. If you act because something intimate calls you, even without explanation, the soul is guiding. The soul asks for spiritual boldness, not to gamble with your life, but to become who you truly are. And at this point, the question Rumi would leave echoing in the air is this: if your soul were fully in command right now, what decision do you already know you must make? But the ego is holding back. And what would happen if, just for today, you chose to listen only to expansion and completely ignore fear? What is your soul trying to show you in this exact moment that the ego still refuses to let you see? When you truly decide to let the soul guide you, something even deeper happens. The ego tries to trap you using logic. This is one of its most dangerous weapons. It turns logic into a shield, creating perfect arguments to keep you away from your own truth. It says, think more, when what it really wants is for you to doubt yourself. It says, don't be so sure when the soul has already shown the direction. The ego uses logic to disconnect you from something it cannot control, the soul's clarity. And here is the central point few people ever perceive. The soul doesn't need logic to be true. The soul doesn't need to prove anything. It simply points, and this simplicity terrifies the ego because the ego survives through explanations, justifications, calculations, comparisons. The soul lives through direct recognition. Rumi said the soul speaks through the obvious things you try to ignore. The advanced method begins when you understand that the soul guides you through what remains, while the ego guides you through what changes. The soul is stable. The ego is volatile. A truth from the soul will still be true tomorrow. A surge of the ego changes color in a few hours. The ego throws you from side to side trying to confuse you because confusion is the territory where it rules. The soul gives you a sense of direction that does not waver. Even when you're tired, even when your mind is full, the feeling of the soul does not disappear. It only becomes covered. And this is shocking when you finally notice it. The soul never goes away. The noise comes from the ego. The soul doesn't pressure you, but it doesn't retreat either. It stays there, steady, waiting for you to finally recognize that the quiet feeling that never leaves is exactly the direction you need to follow. Now we reach another extremely deep point. The ego controls you through excess. The soul guides you through precision. The ego gives you thousands of possibilities. The soul gives you one. The ego creates endless scenarios so you get lost. The soul shows you a single movement that resolves everything. The ego overloads you. The soul simplifies you. The ego suffocates you with alternatives. The soul delivers only what matters. And that is exactly why the soul is so hard to hear, because you are used to the ego's noise. The soul does not compete. It simply shines. And if you haven't learned to recognize that shine, you confuse silence with absence. But silence is not absence. Silence is pure presence. The soul speaks in the direction where your breath becomes easier. The ego speaks in the direction where you lose your breath. There is also a secret almost no one understands. The soul will never guide you to preserve an old version of yourself. The ego will. The ego does everything it can to maintain who you used to be, because that old you is the only version it can manipulate. Every time you try to grow, the ego tries to pull you back into old patterns, because the new is the territory of the soul. The soul calls you into something you haven't lived yet, and that's why you feel a mix of fear and excitement at the same time. This unknown place is the signature of the soul. The ego leads you toward the familiar, the repeated, the predictable. The soul leads you to where you've never been but always belonged. That's why following the soul feels like returning, even when everything is new. And here comes one of Rumi's most powerful instructions. The soul guides you through what grows inside you, not through what you were shaped to be. The ego keeps you trapped in what you were taught, what was expected, what was conditioned. The soul leads you toward what is emerging, what is blossoming, what is being born now. A direction from the soul always makes you feel like you are living your life, not the life the world wanted from you. A direction from the ego always makes you feel like you're performing a role. Rumi said the ego wears masks, but the soul wears essence. And when you realize you've been living to maintain a mask, you feel a deep emptiness. That emptiness is not failure. It is a sign that the soul is calling. But there is an even sharper blade on this path. The soul guides you through absolute honesty. The ego guides you through the stories you tell yourself to avoid discomfort. The ego creates beautiful justifications to maintain behaviors that sabotage you. The soul destroys all these justifications with a simple truth: this no longer serves you. The ego complicates. The soul cuts. The ego delays. The soul reveals. The soul does not let you run from yourself, and that is exactly why following the soul requires courage. It places you face to face with everything you've hidden. But it is this truth that frees you. The ego tries to save you from discomfort. The soul tries to save you from the lie. And now comes the question that opens another portal. If you removed every justification the ego invented, what is the one direction your soul would leave clearly, unmistakably in front of you? And what is stopping you from following it in this exact second? When you truly begin surrendering to the movement of the soul, something even more subtle and brutal appears. The ego tries to control you by using old desires that no longer exist in you. It recycles past wants, dead versions, outdated impulses, pulling you back toward a path you've already outgrown. It tries to convince you that you still want what the soul already released. This is one of the ego's most dangerous tricks. It uses your past as a chain. It feeds on the old versions of you that you still haven't buried. Rumi said the greatest obstacle of the soul is not the external world, but the attachment to old identities you insist on carrying. And when these recycled desires resurface, you feel exactly that, a sensation of returning to what once drained you. The soul guides you toward what renews you. The ego pulls you toward what exhausts you. The soul will never force you to relive what already destroyed you. The ego will. It makes you repeat patterns because patterns are predictable to it. The ego cannot walk into the new, so it drags you back to the familiar. To follow the soul, you must learn to recognize when something only feels right because it once felt familiar. Familiar is not soul. Familiar is memory. The soul doesn't want you to live from memory. It wants you to live from presence. Rumi said the soul is the now that calls you forward, while the ego is the past that tries to pull you back. The soul wants to create. The ego wants to repeat. If you feel trapped in cycles that repeat themselves, it is not a lack of strength. It is the ego imprisoning you inside an emotional labyrinth it built to stay in control. Now comes an extremely advanced and direct principle. The soul guides you through the lightness of the inevitable. What comes from the soul happens naturally. The ego traps you in the force of insistence. Anything you have to force is ego. Anything that flows when you align is soul. This is one of the most powerful distinctions because the ego convinces you that nothing works unless you push yourself to the edge. But the soul works the opposite way. When something belongs to the soul, the path fits without self-violence. The soul never demands self-aggression. The ego demands it constantly. It convinces you to persist in situations that have already drained you, to insist on people who have already left you energetically, to fight for something that has already lost its meaning. The soul guides you toward what grows when you breathe. The ego guides you toward what withers when you try to keep it alive. Another brutal truth. The soul guides you toward what makes you more true, while the ego guides you toward what makes you look right. The soul cares nothing about the image you project. It cares about the reality you live. The ego is obsessed with approval, validation, comparison. The soul is obsessed with authenticity. Rumi said the soul chooses paths that strengthen truth, not appearance. The ego wants you to be someone. The soul wants you to be yourself. And when you finally learn to let the soul guide you, you realize that true choices may defy expectations, break patterns, disappoint people, but they free you. The ego fears disappointing the world. The soul fears disappointing your essence. Now comes an even sharper teaching. The soul guides you through what illuminates you immediately, while the ego guides you through what promises future rewards. The soul speaks in the now. The ego speaks in one day. The soul shows you an instant truth. The ego offers a distant prize to justify a wrong path. Whenever you sacrifice your present to try to save a future that doesn't even exist, it's ego. Whenever you feel that something is true, the moment it happens, it's soul. The soul guides you toward realities that bloom. The ego guides you toward fantasies that drain you. Rumi said the soul lives where your feet are. The ego lives where your mind gets lost. And now the boldest portal appears. When the soul is truly guiding you, it shows you there is something you already know but still refuse to admit. The soul reveals. The ego hides. The soul exposes what is ripe. The ego tries to convince you that it's not time yet. The soul pushes you to become who you already are. The ego tries to keep you small so it doesn't lose control. The question the soul asks is simple and devastating. Why are you afraid to be what I already know you are? And from here, a new thread pulls you inward. If you released every old version of yourself the ego still uses to hold you back, what is the single truth the soul would leave exposed in front of you right now? When you begin to approach the vibration of the soul, the ego tries to create the illusion of urgency. It tries to convince you that you're late, that you need to hurry, that something terrible will happen if you don't decide now. This is the most refined form of control, because the soul does not recognize being late. It only recognizes alignment. The soul does not work by the clock. It works by awakening. And when you realize that internal urgency is always an ego trap, something reorganizes inside you. Suddenly, time stops being an enemy and becomes a silent ally. The soul doesn't want you fast. It wants you conscious. The soul guides you through a direction that grows the closer you get to it. The ego guides you down paths that shrink the further you walk. Paths of the soul gain color, paths of the ego lose meaning. It is so direct that almost no one notices. Anything that becomes heavier the more you continue is ego. Anything that becomes more alive as you follow it is soul. The soul expands the reality it touches. The ego dries out the reality it tries to control. There is also a hidden movement of the soul the ego can never imitate. The soul guides you through silent recognition, while the ego tries to guide you through comparison. Whenever you feel the need to measure yourself, to prove yourself, to compare or compete, that is ego. The soul requires no comparison because it knows each path is unique. The soul guides you toward what makes sense to you, not what impresses others. Rumi said the soul drinks from a wine no one else can see, and that is why it never competes for external cups. Another deep key, the soul guides you toward what brings you closer to yourself. The ego guides you toward what pulls you away. The ego wants you to live outward, seeking validation, recognition, external answers, invisible applause. The soul pulls you inward, into the clarity that is born the moment you stop asking the world for permission to exist. When you let the soul guide you, you no longer look outward to know who you are. And that is exactly when life begins to align with a precision that feels almost frightening. But something even more powerful emerges. The soul guides you toward what makes you honest with yourself. The ego guides you toward whatever keeps you comfortable inside the lie. Yes, the ego prefers a comfortable lie over a transformative truth. The soul cuts through every mask and requires you to look at yourself without filters, not to punish you, but to return the wholeness you lost while trying to please the world. Rumi said, "The wound is the place where the light enters, and that wound is exactly where the ego loses its power and the soul begins to move." Another advanced key, the soul does not push you to choose, it makes you able to see. The ego insists on impulsive decisions made from anxiety, fear, or urgency. The soul places light on the path. It does not force, it illuminates. When you let the soul guide you, you realize clarity comes before the decision. The soul creates lucidity. The ego creates confusion. The soul opens. The ego tangles. And now a brutal Sufi secret emerges. The soul can only guide you once you stop negotiating with your truth. The ego makes you negotiate what matters. It makes you shrink, delay, retreat, compromise yourself. The soul does not negotiate when it speaks. It gives you the pure direction, without emotional discounts. That is why it is so transformative. The soul does not want to make you fit into the world. It wants to expand you until you overflow. Another deep revelation. The ego demands guarantees. The soul demands presence. The ego needs certainties before taking a step. The soul needs only sincerity. Whenever you try to predict the outcome before acting, that is ego. Whenever you feel the movement is true even without knowing where it will lead, that is soul. The soul never leads you toward what is predictable. It leads you toward what is necessary. Here is a truth that instantly dismantles the ego. The soul guides you through what remains even when you try to ignore it. That silent thought that returns, that deep desire that persists, that inner calling you tried to suffocate. The soul does not give up. The ego gives up quickly. The soul holds the thread. The ego tries to cut it. And the more you try to smother this calling, the more it presses from within, not like anxiety, but like a kind of homesickness for the life you have not yet lived. Now something even more visceral arises. The soul guides you through the peace you feel before it happens. The ego promises peace after it happens. The ego lives in, "When I finally achieve this, then I'll feel peace." The soul gives you peace now, before the step, and that peace is the purest sign that you're touching something true. The soul also guides through simplicity. The ego seduces through complexity. The ego wants everything to be difficult, dramatic, full of trials. The soul wants clarity. Soul paths are deep, but never complicated. They don't restrict your breath. They don't create heaviness. They create direction. Another truth few dare to accept. The soul guides you toward what makes you greater. The ego guides you toward what keeps you small. Anything that asks you to shrink, dim yourself, or accept crumbs is ego. Anything that asks you to expand, align, and embody your light is soul. The soul does not want your safety, it wants your magnitude. Now a central Sufi point emerges. The soul never guides through fear of losing. It guides through the vision of what wants to be born. The ego traps you with, "Don't lose this." The soul frees you with, "There is something greater coming." The ego protects the old. The soul announces the new. And now as you breathe and feel this movement, the question that opens the next cycle appears. What inside you is trying to be born? And what is the ego still trying to prevent you from seeing? Become a member of the channel and receive the hidden teachings the soul recognizes before the mind. Enter now to access what few are ready to hear. The soul brought you here not to finish something, but to deepen what has begun awakening within you. Nothing spoken before makes sense unless it now becomes a silent vibration moving in your chest, as if something inside you were finally remembering the path. The soul does not guide through answers, but through approximations. It does not shout, it touches. And in that touch, you realize that everything you tried to control never belonged to the ego. It was always the soul waiting for you to surrender to what is already true. Every thread of this journey does not end. It folds into another, like the breath that never announces when it starts or when it ends, and it simply continues. Comment, "I surrender to the call of my soul." If you felt something sacred ignite within you, this phrase seals the vibration of what awakened here, like a silent initiation that only those who have heard their own heart can recognize. Leave this seal in the comments and notice what happens inside you when you offer this surrender before the invisible. And if you wish to remain in this sacred space where Rumi walks beside you, subscribe to the channel, not as a common gesture, but as one who steps into an inner garden where every word is a doorway and every video is a new dance with the infinite. Allow yourself to be found by the next flame, and remember, sometimes the soul whispers the loudest precisely when you think the silence has ended.